We'll be looking at the riot in Ephesus this morning and look at the account of this event in the book of Acts, chapter 19. I was thinking about when Dr. Sangam was mentioning Byron Cromwell. One of the things that we can pray about for him is that he would get more consistent support. Our church supports him quite a bit, actually, but for some reason, even though we know that we've seen him here and there, probably less than other missionaries that are on the field full-time, some of them, but other churches, and it's just hard for other people to conceive that he would need consistent support, since he's only a temporary, he's just filling in. So hopefully, and he's just done this for, what now, 3, 4, 5 years. As time goes on, hopefully he can gather a couple more churches that will help him consistently. He is if we're going to compare with other missionaries of today, he is sacrificing quite a bit. I don't think he would say that he's sacrificing. The Lord is taking good care of him. But many missionaries bring in $6,000 a month toward their expenses, and they live in a different country. There's a lot of expenses that they have that we don't have. So I hesitate to say that number because we're like, oh, I wish I had $6,000 a month. They probably need it because of the extra expenses of being in odd places and all of that. But Byron is bringing in maybe a third of that, and I don't know exactly the numbers. So I just know that he's bringing in much less than the missionaries that he takes their place. And our missionaries do help him. They leave and they help him. But there's other people that are hearing about his ministry and thinking, oh, we'd like to have him. And we're like, well, you need to help, because not many churches are doing that just yet. So we pray that more churches would find out about his work and see the help that he is to other missionaries and take him on for support. Along with I just know that his financial needs are something that are a burden to him. And I wouldn't say he's worrying about it, but it would be helpful not to have as much concern there. All right, Acts chapter 19. We have our text for this morning is verses 23 to the end of the chapter. There's 2 paragraphs there, and I shouldn't just ramble on because I might not finish, but you might say, how can you spend 1 week on one verse that's less than a sentence, and now we're going to spend 1 week on 20 verses? There's just a lot of in this passage, it's kind of just narrative, and there's not as much to consider in there. There's plenty as we go along. We'll notice some things, mostly notice things about human nature and the nature of mobs and that type of thing. But we'll go through this passage and hopefully get a better understanding of it and see how people are and how the Lord took care of Paul through this situation. So in verse 23, the Bible says, and at the same time there arose no small stir about that way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, ye know that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, ye see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. So that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worships. And when they heard these things, they were full of wrath, and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And the whole city was filled with confusion, and having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered in unto the people, the disciples suffered him not. And certain of the chief of Asia, which were his friends, sent unto him, desiring him that he would not adventure himself into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing, and some another, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with the hand, and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice about the space of 2 hours cried out, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And when the town clerk had appeased the people, he said, Ye men of Ephesus, what man is there that knows not how that the city of the Ephesians is a worshiper of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Jupiter? Seeing then that these things cannot be spoken against, ye ought to be quiet, and to do nothing rashly. For ye have brought hither these men, which are neither robbers of churches, nor yet blasphemers of your goddess. Wherefore, if Demetrius and the craftsmen which are with him have a matter against any man, the law is open, and there are deputies. Let them implead one another. But if ye inquire anything concerning other matters, it shall be determined in a lawful assembly. For we are in danger to be called in question for this day's uproar, there being no cause whereby we may give an account of this concourse. And when he had thus spoken, he dismissed the assembly. So we're going to see three things today: the causes of the riot, the characteristics of the riot, and the calming of the riot. The causes of the riot, we look back at verse 23, is really Satan's antagonism. Anytime you do a work for the Lord, the devil is not going to be happy about it. And if you recall, last week or the week before, we said that from Ephesus, Paul's work there, his first 3 months in the synagogue, and then 2 more years, anyway, so more than 2 years. We find out in the next chapter that it was nearly 3 years that he was there. Over the course of those 3 years, all of Asia, and we had the map there with the picture. It's not Asia that we call Asia, and it's not Asia Minor. I'm not trying to minimize it. It was the whole province of Asia, in which there's at least 10 major cities. 6 others are the 6 others with Ephesus is the 7 churches of Revelation, and then there's churches mentioned in Colossians, and actually Colossae is not mentioned in Revelation, and it's one of the cities of Asia, and Hierapolis is another one. So at least 9 cities. The Bible says the whole province of Asia received the gospel. And so God is doing a tremendous work through the work of Paul and the believers that were there. And the devil doesn't like it when his work is thwarted and God's work is advanced. The kingdom of Christ is advanced. And so the Bible says, and at the same time there arose no small stir about that way. Now, if you read through Acts, and I've tried to point it out, I think each time, that way is not just an indefinite, pronoun, oh, that way, go that way, go this way, that way. The way, or that way, apparently, from its usage in Acts and other places, was a particular designation for Christians. They didn't know exactly. In Antioch, they were first called Christians in Antioch, but they were also called followers of the way. Well, the way is Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And so many of the believers in the beginning of Christianity were Jewish people, but they weren't Jews, normal Jews. They were Jews that followed the way. And there arose no small stir concerning that way. And so then, and here's the account of it. There was no small stir, and this is how it came about. A certain man named Demetrius. There's a couple other Demetriuses in the Bible, but we're pretty sure it's quite likely it's most likely that this is a unique Demetrius. There's at least 2 others, and probably not this guy. So there's probably 3 Demetriuses in the Bible, and they're all different Demetriuses. He was a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana. So Diana was, just you recall from the story, she was one of the idol gods of paganism, and known throughout the world, but Ephesus was her home. In fact, the town clerk at the end says everybody knows that Ephesus is the guardian or is the special worshiper of Diana. And so Diana had a temple there, or they had erected a temple to Diana there, a magnificent temple. Writings from that time, people that study the writings from that time say that it is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. If you've heard that word before, and maybe you've heard it several times. I don't think I've assigned that title to any more than 7 things myself. I just say that, oh, well, one of the wonders of the ancient world. How many of the 7 wonders of the ancient world were there? Well, this was one of them, and there were 7. You could look that up sometime. But 127 pillars, 425 feet long, 220 feet wide, each pillar 60 feet high. The pillars were donated, the money for the pillars, or the pillars themselves, donated from kings. So 127 kings contributed to the building of the temple. It's a very popular place, very magnificent place, and we don't have time to go into all of the, whatever that goes along with the temple worship there in Ephesus. But people would come there, and pretty much just like, much like, maybe more, even more so. But if you go to a place, I could think of many different places. If you go to the temples just as a tourist of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, you say, I want to see these things. They were built 1,000 years ago. You get out of your car, you're going to have 20, I don't know, 5, 10 children running up to you trying to sell you things, calendars, and they speak perfect English. They know about 200 words in English, and they can speak them perfectly, okay? They know all about the major towns in America, and they know to ask you where you're from and then tell you something about your place, because what do they want? Their parents want you to give them money. Anyway, so, but if you go somewhere special, what do you want to do? You get a t-shirt, or you get this summer I went to, I was able to take a vacation into Europe, and we ended the vacation near Paris, and still on the window ledge by my kitchen table is a little keychain with what? An Eiffel Tower on it. So I don't worship this Eiffel Tower, okay? But people, when they went to Ephesus, they would want to bring something from Ephesus back. They would bring, and they added on to that curiosity and like this place thing, the religious nature of the temple. And so the silversmiths would make little boxes that were replicas of the temple. And inside there was a replica of the idol, and people would take that back with them. Not just to say, hey, look what I got when I was in Ephesus. They would worship with it. Anyway, so it's always, in all times, the mixing of religion and money. They made silver shrines for Diana, and they brought no small gain he brought no small gain under the craftsmen. So we assume from that Demetrius was instrumental in bringing money to the craftsmen and the silversmiths. So he was probably like the union boss or whatever. He was the head man, and so the silversmiths made money, and then the craftsmen. So the silversmiths did the hard work, craftsmen did the preliminary work on these miniature temples, shrines, and he calls them all together with the workmen of like occupation, said, that it's by this craft that we have our wealth because of what we do. So we would say, his first and most powerful argument was money, right? Money, that we're losing money. Now, his statements are probably hyperbolic, which means they're probably overstatements. But I will say that he wouldn't have made any statements if there hadn't been a dent in their income, right? We could say, oh, he's obviously still making money. Sure, but he's obviously missing a lot of money, because he wouldn't even noticed. Why did he notice? Because a lot of people stopped buying shrines. Not only people in Ephesus, but people from throughout Asia would come to Ephesus, and they were no longer interested in the Temple of Diana. Maybe they were interested in meeting with other Christians. Or maybe people from all over Asia didn't even come to Ephesus. Why would they go to Ephesus? They don't need to visit the temple anymore. And actually the temple had was becoming more and more of a source of Ephesus's commerce, because the river that supplied them, there was a river maybe 2 miles long or 1.5 miles long from the sea. Well, it was continually being filled with silt. And so ships and they tried to dredge it, but with the technology of those days, they couldn't. So ships were having a harder time getting up to Ephesus. So you don't have merchandise, ship commerce coming through your town. You lose that. Now, if we're going to lose the money that comes to the town from temple worship, we're about to be turned into, a ghost town, an archaeological, a UNESCO site. That there's a little humor in there because it is now. But so he says, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Sirs, you know that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, you see and hear not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia. So not just Ephesus, throughout all Asia, this Paul. It wouldn't be, you don't like persecution, but if you get singled out in persecution, there's at least one thing that you can enjoy about that, and that is that you've caught the attention of people that hate God. You don't like that, but that must mean that you're doing something for God. And Paul clearly was doing a great work for God. He had helpers and all, but he was the one that, Demetrius was this Paul. He's the instigator of all this trouble. He's persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. Now, I just think that is a funny statement. Here are these guys. They of all people know what that little shrine is made of. They got a stack of wood, and I mean they're creating these things, hundreds of them. How can every single one of them be a god? They've got to know that. But in the back of their mind, they've got to know, I'm just creating gods like crazy. I'm a god maker. I just keep creating gods. I just make another god, sell them, make another god, sell them, make another god, sell them. But Paul has the audacity to say that anything that's made by humans' hands isn't a god. I just laugh when I read that statement. But of course, in order for him to sell the things, they have to be gods. So that's all part of the charade. So that not only our craft is in danger to be set at naught. It's possible that we will lose. There won't even be silversmiths anymore. Okay, now that's an overstatement. There are still silversmiths, and none of them are making shrines to Diana. Right? Okay, so their craft wouldn't be lost completely. But he's trying to rile up opposition. But also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised. And by the way, besides the money, there's the spiritual. So there is a spiritual, the goddess would be despised. But that's about all there is, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worships. So he says, and you know that if that happens, then our whole city is going to lose her influence and prominence. All Asia comes here and thinks of Ephesus as a magnificent city, but if there's no temple, then that's going to end. So that he appeals to their pride, their patriotism also. So all of these things, he riles them up, and when they heard these things, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Now apparently they I don't know where it is, because it says then the whole city was filled with confusion. But they went from their the Union Hall, Local 1066 or whatever it was, and got out into the street and started shouting and rallying, just rioting, and stirring up the whole town. If you've been to Ephesus, if you haven't, there's a part of the, I would say there's a part of the town that is behind the theater, and then you have the big library of Ephesus, and then the theater, overlooks down toward the sea, and there's a long street. The marketplace is below the theater, and then a long street out there. In my imagination, the Union Hall is down toward the end of that street, and they go out into the street, and then they're just rioting, yelling, screaming, "Great is Diana," and people are wondering, what are you guys shouting for, and all of this. And this riot of people, this mob of people, is heading up towards the marketplace, and they end up in the theater. So when they heard these things, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians," and the whole city was filled with confusion. And that's not surprising. People just hear shouting or whatever. They come out to see what it is, and one person says one thing, one person says another, but everybody knows it must be important, so they jump in there. They don't know what they're shouting for, except for Diana of the Ephesians. Full of confusion, and they caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia. Now these two men we do see in other places in the Bible. This Gaius is not to be confused with the Gaius of Corinth, because Corinth is not in Macedonia, or the Gaius of Derbe, because Derbe is not in Macedonia. This is its own Gaius, and Aristarchus. Macedonia is where Thessalonica and Philippi and Berea, those towns are. So men of Macedonia, and they were Paul's companions in travel. We see, we're reminded again that Paul had helpers with him in his travels. And they rushed with one accord into the theater. Now the theater at Ephesus can hold 25,000 people. You can look up pictures of it. It's been somewhat, I wouldn't say it's been restored, but it's been uncovered. You can tell, you say 25,000 people back then. Yeah, just look up a picture of it, and you will not doubt. 25,000 people can fit in the theater. And so they're in the theater, and Paul would have gone in unto the people, but the disciples suffered him not. So this mob, this riot, is full of anger, confusion, ignorance, and we'll see some more of that. But so Paul is going to go in there. Of course, Paul has been in riotous situations before, and he feels like, who knows what he feels like, but perhaps he feels like, I'm a Roman citizen. I might be able, if they will just be quiet, I can keep my friends from getting in trouble, and also, here's an opportunity to preach the gospel to even more of them. I don't know if that's exactly what he's thinking, but he was going to go in there, and the disciples said, no, don't go in there. They were afraid for his life. And the Bible says, certain of the chief of Asia. Now this is interesting. Chief of Asia, the word there is called Asiarch, which means a chief of Asia. But the Asiarch was an office held by people for 1 year at a time, and there were different ones. And this one is particular to the province of Asia. The province of Galatia had a Galatarch. I don't know how you say all the provinces, but every province had their, let's say, Asiarch. They're compared to an Asiarch. And the Asiarch in Asia's responsibility was to oversee and promote the worship of Rome and the emperor. So here was some, probably, they only had held office for a year, so probably some previous years or whatever. We don't know why it's plural there, but Asiarchs, people who were responsible for loyalty and even worship toward Rome, are friends of Paul. So Paul has acquaintances who either they were that and now they're saved, or they are that, they're not saved, because how could you be saved if you're promoting worship of the emperor in Rome? But either way, they're concerned for Paul. They may also be concerned that the town doesn't get burnt down. They may also think, Paul, if you go in, it's bad enough now, but if Paul goes in there, it's going to get worse. Again, we don't know exactly why they say these things, but they desired him that he would not venture himself into the theater. And then we go back into the theater. Some cried one thing and some another, full of confusion, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. So they were confused and they were ignorant. Now I know that I'm just putting that word in there, but that's what they don't know. They don't even know why they're there. One says one people that do know why they're there don't agree about why they're there. They're confused, and then many people don't even know why they're there. It's a typical mob. I think most mobs fit this description. They're angry, they're confused, they're ignorant, and they don't know. They don't even know why they're there. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude. The Jews put this Alexander forward. Alexander beckons with a hand and would have made a defense to the people. And when they found out he was a Jew, they all just started yelling. So they're closed-minded. Okay, now probably, if we know the Jewish people, this guy was probably going to try to distance himself. He's saying, we're Jews, we're not like Paul, so that the Jews wouldn't lose their status in the town, because they fought hard for that status. They were not idolaters, and they already had there's already anti-Semitism toward them because they didn't accept what was going on there. But as soon as they found out he was a Jew, they're just shouting him down. So they're closed-minded. You can't tell a mob anything. They don't know that one thinks one thinks another. They're confused. They don't know anything, but they think they know everything, so you're not going to be able to tell them anything, and they're full of anger. So they just shout for 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So the town clerk, he might be thought of as a mayor. He's the guy that controlled and just any official government business came through him for the town. So, and he says, hey, we're Ephesus. Everybody knows that we are the host of Diana. Diana came down from Jupiter, probably a meteorite that they found and carved on a little bit and decided to worship. But nothing can take away Ephesus' status as the home of Diana. And these people haven't stolen or blasphemed. They're not robbers of churches. They didn't go in and steal Diana out of your temple, did they? They didn't steal your little shrines. They're not stealing anything, and they haven't blasphemed your God, which is kind of interesting. They said that idols are not gods, but they didn't rail against their religion. They didn't blaspheme Diana, which to me seems funny. To blaspheme a fake, how can you blaspheme something that's not really real? But they hadn't. They weren't known for that. Which kind of gives a little instruction to us on how do we point out the error of people. If I go to you and choose something that's closest to your heart and tell you you're stupid, and the thing that's close to your heart is stupid, are you going to listen to me? Probably not. So Paul didn't do that. He didn't blaspheme their God. He told them about the one true God. So they hadn't done that. And so he says, if Demetrius has an issue, and the craftsmen which are with, if they have a matter against any man, the law is open. So there's the law. They can take him to court. And then he says, and there are deputies. There's a proconsul. And so if the law can't answer his question, he can appeal to the proconsul. And there's there. And let them implead one another. That's just what happens in court. Let them present a case and arguments, and let the other ones, one another, let them go back and forth in court and do that. And then, but if ye inquire anything concerning other matters, it shall be determined at a lawful assembly. It says, this is not a law. This is not a called thing. We have lawful assemblies. In fact, they had them 3 times a month. They would meet. If you got a question, if you want to know something, come to the scheduled lawful assembly. And that word assembly is exactly the same word as church throughout, in almost all places throughout the Bible. A lawful assembly. An assembly is a called out group of people. So, the schedule says we're going to meet together at a certain time. So everyone that wants to come to know about the business of Ephesus will come out from their house, and they'll come to this place, and they'll meet together to discuss the business of Ephesus. It's a called out assembly, a lawful assembly. And churches are just that. We don't have the time to go into the doctrine of that and the importance of why a church is a called out assembly, and why a called out assembly can only be in one place. So it's local, but there's the word, and it's again in the last verse of the chapter. So the law is open, and if we have something to discuss, we can do that at a lawful assembly, for we are in danger of being called in question for this day's uproar. The Romans, one of the biggest things the Romans feared was mobs. They wanted control. They controlled the world. They didn't want any mob action. And so so they were in danger of being called into question for that. And Ephesus enjoyed certain status within the Roman Empire that if they lost, life would be harder on them. So if they lost their colony status or their free status or whatever it was, all of a sudden more Romans would be there, more Roman soldiers would be there, and life would be much harder. So we can't be having this type of thing. And so we're liable to be called into question for this. We need to just be quiet, go home, and act like this never happened, and hope that they don't ask about it. That's basically what he's saying. There was an uproar and no cause. And basically he says, we're in danger to be called in question for there being no cause whereby we may give an account of this concourse. There's no reason for this. Christianity, basically what he's saying by that is Christianity is not at odds with the Roman government. And that is kind of a theme of Luke. We'll see that over and over and over again. Christianity is not at odds with the Roman government, okay, as far as trying to supplant it and all that. And when he had thus spoken, he dismissed them. So we see here in this event several things, a lot concerning how mobs think or don't think, and some of their reaction tells us about how Paul and the Christians had acted beforehand. So we've made it. We better pray because we're running a